Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to repair a snowblower with a defective auger gearbox. So here's the blower. It's a Craftsman. It's actually made by Murray. And the problem with this blower is the customer says it will not blow snow. What's going on is the augers will not turn at all. The impeller turns back here and the shaft. So the shaft is inside the box here. It's actually turning in here, but it's not making the shaft for the augers turn. So right away I know that there is a problem inside the gearbox. And what reinforces that diagnosis is that the snowblower has the wrong shear pins. It actually has grade 5 or grade 8 regular bolts, which is not recommended on a snowblower. Regular shear pins are usually made of a grade 2 metal, which is much softer. So again, here we can see the importance of using proper shear bolts on any snowblower. To start this repair, what I'm going to do is take off the belt cover here. All you have to do is loosen a bolt on each side of the cover. It's a 3/8 bolt. Now carefully lift it up because it is made of plastic and you don't want to break it. Now on this snowblower I'm going to loosen the bolt that holds the pin near the belt. You don't need to take the bolt off, you just loosen it and move the pin up. This will make it easier to get the belt off the pulleys. Also today I'm going to disconnect the spark plug before I continue with this procedure. Always do this to prevent accidental startups. And what I've done here is unplug the spark plug boot. Now I'm just going to pull the belt right off. This is the auger belt, by the way. And the auger belt is the only belt you need to remove today to do this repair. You can leave the drive belt exactly the way it is. Now at this point in the operation I'm going to pull the hair clip from here. This will separate the shaft that turns the chute, and you can stick the pin right back in so you don't lose it. In case you haven't figured it out yet, what I'm doing is actually separating the blower in half. Now what I need to do is remove the two top bolts here. There's two on the other side that are the same, and the bottom bolt over here, all I need to do is to loosen that one. So I'm just going to loosen up the bolts by hand. And now with my cordless impact, I'm going to remove the two top bolts. And since I'm working alone today, what I have done is set up a stool at the back so when the blower separates, the back half is going to lean on that stool. And now I'm going to repeat the procedure on the other side. Now at this point there's nothing holding the blower together, so I'm just going to pry both sides. And it hardly requires any force to do this. As you can see, it's separated in half now. Now the next step in this operation will be to remove the augers from the auger housing. To start the removal of the auger system, I'm going to remove both bolts here, and they're a 1/2 inch. And I'm just going to repeat the process on the other side. And now you need to remove the nut that holds the auger pulley. And this is a 3/4 inch. And an impact wrench works really good for that. Now to get the pulley off the shaft, I'm just going to screw in the nut just a bit. And I'm going to put a piece of hardwood and use a brass hammer and just basically tap it. So at this point it doesn't matter how hard I hit the shaft, it will not separate from the pulley. I'm actually trying to get the whole auger system out. Because I don't want to damage the shaft, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to drill 2 holes in the pulley, use my puller and heat the shaft over here and remove it that way. I'll show you how I'm going to do that. As you can see, there's metal shards in here. They were there when I first took the nut off, so I'm not sure what's happened here before. It looks like it's been heated in the past as well, and the threads aren't that good. Now the guy did tell me that it's been worked on before. So here's what I've done. I've drilled 2 holes in the pulley as close to the shaft as I can. I've put a nut at the bottom of each bolt. I'm using my puller. Now I'm going to tighten up the puller, and hopefully the pulley will come out without me having to use my oxy acetylene torches. And the good thing is that it's coming out. Usually on older machines you do have to use your acetylene torches. What I've done here is put a nut here between the puller and the shaft, because this part of the puller was going to go against the pulley, so that's going to give me a bit more room to get the pulley right out. So as you can see, I've got the pulley right out, which is good. Here's what it looked like on the other side. Now the 2 holes I made here will not damage the pulley. You also want to make sure that you did not bend the pulley when you removed it. If it is damaged, then just replace it. Now what you need to do is remove the key from the keyway here. And now you should be able to pull out the whole auger assembly, as long as the shaft is not seized in the bearing back there. Now since the shaft is seized in the bearing, I cannot pull out the whole auger assembly right now. What I'm first going to do is remove the 3 nuts over here, and they're a 1/2 inch by the way. So now I've got a tip top back like this, and now you want to push this in as far back as you can. The reason for that is so you can get a pry bar here around the bearing cage. And I'm going to try to pry the bearing off like this without using the torches. So I've only got the cage out for now. Here's what I've done now. I've used the 2-jaw puller, set it up against the bearing. What I did is I put pieces of wood underneath to jack up the whole auger assembly so that I would get the space for the puller here. You can also use a bearing puller as well to do this. And I'll just basically tighten up the puller. And that bearing is coming out really good. I will have to rethread the threads over here though when I put it back together. Also make sure to retrieve the 3 bolts here that were holding this cage on the bearing. And now the whole auger assembly is going to come out of there really easy. Here I have the whole auger assembly on my workbench. The first thing I'm going to do here is remove the 2 bushings. There's one here and one at the other end of the shaft. Now what I need to do is remove the bolts here. Like I mentioned previously in the video, this is not the correct way to replace a shear pin. This is an actual bolt, and always remember to put the proper shear pins here. And today I'll be using my pneumatic cutoff tool. And make sure you've got your safety glasses on when you do this. Now that I've cut off the bolts, I'm going to punch the rest out with a 1/4 inch roll pin punch. And I'll just do the same on this side. And now I should be able to slide the augers right off the shaft. At this point in the operation, what I need to do is separate the gearbox here by removing all the bolts. And by the way, these are all 1/2 inch in size. And now I've got all the bolts off, and it's time to see what's happened inside there. Fortunately, the case is separating itself, so I'm not going to have to force it to separate it, which is always a good thing. So now let's take it apart. And here's the damage, as you can see. Most of the grease is gone or compacted in one area of the case, so it wasn't helping at all. Now I'm just going to spray a bit of penetrating oil to make it easier to slide the case off the shaft. It is on there pretty tight actually. Now you can also use a rubber mallet to tap it down, but do this gently because you could easily break the case. You want to pound as close to the shaft as you can. If it doesn't do much difference, then stop doing that, because like I said, you can break the case easily. Sometimes just turning the case on the shaft will work better. Sometimes where you pass the hole where the shear pin goes in, it can be harder to get through because sometimes it forms a little burr or a wear mark here, and it's harder to get it in. If that's the case, just grind it down smooth. Also, a good way to get the covers off is if you put the shaft in the vise. You're not really going to damage the shaft because the auger goes on there and it's a bit loose on there. Then you just grab the cover, turn it, and pull. Now what I need to do is remove the gear, but before I do that, I'm going to run an emery cloth all over the shaft. This is to take off the surface rust so that the gear slides off a lot easier. So do this all around the shaft. Now I'm going to spray a lubricant and wipe it clean. And I'll spray more lubricant to make it easier to slide the gear off. Now at this point the gear is done, so I don't care if I break it while I'm removing it, so I'm just going to tap it out. Also make sure to wear safety glasses anytime you tap stuff out. Now as soon as the gear gets out of its spot, a key is going to come out, so make sure you retrieve that. And here's a close-up view of that gear. It's totally done. Now when you take these apart, remember that there's a washer that goes against each cover. This one's a bit harder to see, but it is in there in the grease. I can see that there was some kind of seal back here where the impeller shaft went in that is shot, so I'm going to have to look into getting a new seal here. Also, there's a bushing here that's really loose and you can see it's egg-shaped inside, so that's going to need to be replaced. Now I'm going to remove this bushing over here. It seems good. It's nice and tight in there. And this worm gear here needs to be removed. I'm going to remove it with the rubber mallet, kind of like I removed the other gear over here. Now the ideal way to remove this gear is with a bearing puller, but because this is shot here, I'm just going to use a fork like this and pound it down. Make sure to wear your safety glasses. Now I got the bushing here broken off, and I'm going to continue with the way I'm doing. Now remember, this is not the factory authorized way of removing this gear. I'm just doing this today because it is coming out and the bushing is already shot. Alright, so I've got this gear off. Now you want to get the key off of the shaft. And here it is. Okay guys, it took me about a week to get the parts. I finally have them all, and I'm going to show you the parts that I did end up getting and what the part numbers are. So here's the gear. As you can see, the old gear is quite stripped. I also got this bushing, this seal, and the gasket for the auger gearbox. I'm going to give you all the part numbers, and I am going to post a link for each individual part under this video so you can buy them directly online. Now the part number for the gear is 53730MA. The gasket part number is 897MA. This quad ring, it's called, is part number 53737MA. And this bushing over here is part number 583126MA. Again, look below the video for all the links to where you can directly buy these online. Now here's the impeller that I took off the snowblower. As you can see, it's in bad shape. Also, the threads were in bad shape at the back. They could have been repaired as well, but I did have a spare one in much better condition, so I just gave it a coat of paint, and that's what I'm going to use. It's a lot quicker and cheaper just to use this one here than to waste time fixing this one. And I'm also going to use two different covers that I had here from my spare parts, because the older covers, they're pretty damaged where the ring goes at the back, the seal. As you can see, it's kind of wore out. And it's the same on the other side over here. So at this point now I'm ready to start reassembling everything together. What I did is printed off a parts list from an IPL, and this gives you a better schematic of where all the parts go, especially when you have little washers and stuff like that. Now you'll note that this schematic is slightly different than when I took apart the gearbox previously. The difference comes over here where there's two washers and a bearing in between. When I took apart the other one, it did not have that bearing. Now I do have all these parts, and this is the exact schematic that I'm going to use today. The very first part I'm going to install is the quad ring, part number 53737MA. And since I'm using a 00 grease today for the gearbox, I'm just going to use a bit of that grease to lube the shaft that the parts are going to be sliding on. By the way, this is the type of grease I recommend in all gearboxes you work on. So I'm just going to lube the shaft. This is a nice grease that stays the same thickness whether it's 20 above or 20 below zero. Now just grab the quad ring and slide it on the shaft. Now you want to install this bushing. Again, here's the part number 583126MA, and this is the right side up that the bushing will go in. Now you may have to force it a bit in there to get it through. If it's really hard to get it in, you may have to just sand or file the edges here just a bit. So you can turn it, it's going to go in. Now I'm going to put a washer. Now this bearing's going to go in. By the way, the part for this bearing is 50684MA, and I'm going to reinstall the second washer. You can put grease here if you want. It's not necessary because I am going to be putting a lot of grease in the gearbox. Now you're going to need the key that goes on the shaft here for the worm gear. I'm just going to stick it in there as deep as I can. I'm just going to tap it lightly with a brass hammer. And you want to try to get it on evenly like this so that the worm gear slides on easier. And I am going to put a bit more of that grease so that that gear slides on easier. Now what you want to do is line up the keyhole on the worm gear to the key on the shaft over here. Once you get it started on the shaft, just use a piece of hardwood and a hammer. Now at a certain point the wood's going to hit the shaft, so what I'm going to do now is use a 3/4 inch socket. Make sure you wear safety glasses when you do this. Now at the tip of the shaft there's a bushing that goes over here. If this bushing is worn, replace it. The part number for this is 53731MA. So all you have to do is stick it on the tip. And this part of the assembly is okay for now. The quad ring has slid all the way down, but that's okay. I'll just retrieve it when I put the two covers on. The next step now will be to install the auger gear, which will go on the main shaft. So what I've done is cleaned off one side of the shaft for the gear to slide on easier. Now I'm going to put the key back in its keyway hole here. I'm also just going to grind off the surface of the shear pin holes here on the shaft because sometimes they protrude and it makes it really hard for the gear to go through. What I'm using today is my air die grinder, as you can see, and I'm using a small flat disc. And I'm just going to lightly sand or clean off the edges. And it should have brought down any humps that are there. Now I've got the shaft in the vise and I'm going to put some grease on it. Now you need this gear. It doesn't appear that it matters which side it goes on. When you bring this gear down too, you want to line it up to the key. And this one's coming down with hardly any effort. For the final stage, to get this gear down, I'm going to use a bigger piece of pipe, slide it over the shaft. If during the process you see that the key is popping out like this, just go tap it so that it's even again. And here the gear is installed. What you want to do is even out the key in the center of the gear. You don't want the key to be protruding on either side of it. Here's the hole with the key, so you'd want about the same space on the other side as well. And here's the other side. If you think you've tapped it in too much to one side, then just repeat the process on the opposite side to get the gear back in the center. And as you can see here, the gear should be nice and centered. Now for the next step of the installation, I'm going to grab this cover with the plug. I'm going to stick it on the one side of the shaft. And I've snugged it in the vise. It's not going to damage the shaft. It's just the augers that go over that part of the shaft, so it doesn't really matter. You can put pieces of wood in the vise if you want to. Now this is ready like this. I'm going to position this in this position. Now I'm going to reinstall the gasket. First of all, you want to make sure that the area the gasket goes on is nice and clean. In addition to the gasket, I'm going to add a bit of Permatex RTV silicone. I'm going to apply a thin film all around. It's not a pressurized system, plus you do have the gasket in addition to this stuff. And I'm going to set the gasket on it. And I'm repeating the process on the other cover. Before I continue on, I'm going to add a bit of grease. It's a 0-0 grease, as I've mentioned earlier. And when the machine's all put back together, I will add a bit more through the plug hole. So what I'm going to do here is just put some in. Just be careful of the gasket. I haven't put too much grease in right now, but as I've mentioned, when it's all put back together, I'm going to put a bit of grease through here. As you can see, I'm set up in the vise. I have a block of wood over here to set the impeller on. Now I'm going to line up everything in the gearbox. One very important thing you have to line up properly is this bushing, especially the notch on it over here. It actually sits in the groove on each cover. So first you want to lift everything up. Get this gear down, get this bushing in its hole over here, make sure the quad ring is in its place at the back. So you may have to turn the impeller just to get everything down. While you do this, hold all your parts. Now it's a bit precarious, so don't move it too much because everything could come apart again. Now you want to grab the other cover and put it on as soon as you can before everything comes out of place. Again, make sure to line up the bushing and the little quad ring in the grooves back here. And I'm going to take special attention to this seal back here, or the quad ring as it's called. Now once you've got everything in perfectly, hold it and put a bolt on as soon as you can. You'll notice one of the bolts is longer than the other. This one goes at the back over here. Now that you've got the bolts snug, just go around and tighten them up evenly. So you want to crisscross. I don't have the torque specs, but just use common sense and put them on fairly tight. Now the first thing I'm going to do is add a bit more grease in there. I'm just going to shove in there as much as I can. You want to let the air come out as you squeeze it in. I'm also going to turn the impeller just to get the grease moving around. Now just use your own judgment, make sure it's at least half full. You can always add a bit more each year, but it's usually not necessary. Now that it's all together again, just turn the impeller and make sure the shaft is turning at the same time. Now I forgot to show you guys an important crucial step in this assembly. I forgot to show you that the two washers here and there go on each side of the gear. I did realize this during the video, but then realized I hadn't taped it. So again, the two washers will go between the cover and the gear, and there's two of them and they're quite large. Always refer to a schematic if you're not sure, and you can see them right in here. These bushings over here are actually part of these covers, so don't worry about these. And once you're all done, the impeller should turn freely like this. If it's hard to turn, you may have done something wrong. So always double check it before you actually install it on your snowblower. Now at this point, I'm going to put some grease on the shafts just before I put the augers back on. This is just to prevent them from seizing on there. So you can use any kind of grease for this, wheel bearing grease or synthetic, it doesn't really matter. And I'll do this on both sides. Now I'm just going to slide on the augers. Now I'm going to install new shear pins. Now on one side of the auger the hole's bigger. If you turn it, the hole's smaller. What this is for the shear pin. This is where the collar of the shear pin will go through. Now I'm using a 7/16 socket and a wrench. Now you don't want to tighten up the shear pin completely, you want it to be loose like this, or about 1/8 of play. And now I'm just going to repeat the process on the other side. Now the next thing I'm going to install is the impeller bearing. You have to put the flange over. Once the bearing's in the flange, you got to run the bolts through the inside. So now you'll have to hold the bolt on the other side and tighten up the nut here. And just repeat the process on the other ones. And I also thrown a coat of paint to the welds I added previously. And with the same paint I painted the inside of the auger housing with a paintbrush and trim clad. I actually used the paintbrush to get it on nice and thick just to prevent the rust from coming back. Now what I need to do is add some grease over here at the end of the shaft. What I'm using today is a Valvoline synthetic grease. You don't have to use this same grease, but any grease should work here. And I'm putting it on liberally, as you can see. Now what you want to do is put on the bushings. These are nice solid bushings, by the way. Murray does make some pretty good stuff when it comes to their bushings and stuff like that for the auger. Now at the back of the impeller here I'm going to put some anti-seize. This is what I'm using today. I'm going to put a bit on so that it's there when it goes through the bearing. And it will also prevent the key from jamming on the shaft. Now at this point here, what I have to do is insert the whole auger assembly inside the auger housing. So what you want to do is make sure that your bushings at each end of the shaft are on. They will line up over here on each side of the housing. Then you want to get this shaft here through the bearing. And it's also important that the gearbox is positioned this way. Make sure it's not upside down. Now you want to line up the bushings to the holes and put in the bolts. And I'll do the same on this side. At this point, just flip the housing over like this. And I'm going to put this spacer or collar right here. And I will add a bit more anti-seize here as well. Here's the keyway hole. Just insert the key in there. Now I'm going to install the auger pulley. And when you put it back on the shaft, just line up the keyway hole here to the key on the shaft. Also, when you slide the pulley down, you may want to keep your finger on the key so it doesn't fall out. And now you want to install the nut back on. I did get another nut because the other one, the threads were stripped. And with a 3/4 inch wrench, ratchet or socket, you can tighten it up. Now you can also block the impeller with a piece of wood if you want to tighten up the nut. I'm just going to hold it really tight today and do it like that. And now you want to make sure everything turns freely. And make sure the augers turn as well. And that's perfect. Now the next part in this operation is to join the two parts. What I've done here is tie down the auger lever. What this does is it brings this idler pulley arm all the way up here, so when I join the auger housing, it's not going to be in the way. Now I'm just going to put the belt around the pulley. And you'll notice I have a bolt on each side, but it's not fully screwed in. The reason for that is that it's going to catch in the grooves on the blower. Right down here on each side. It's going to pivot in there, and then I'm going to put some of the top bolts on right away to keep it together. So make sure you keep the other bolts in your hand ready. And another thing you want to make sure is that the bracket on the auger housing goes inside the housing on the drive. And it's the same on this side. It's easy sometimes when you go to put this together for the bracket to go on the wrong side. So once it's in at the bottom, as you see, lift it up and get a bolt in here as soon as possible. Now as soon as you get a bolt in, just tighten it up. This is just to keep everything from falling apart again. And now just reinstall the rest of the bolts. There's 3 on each side, so you got this one, that one, and the one at the bottom. And by the way, they're all 1/2 inch bolts. Now what I do in addition to having the auger lever tied down is I try to keep the belt on the auger pulley throughout the whole installation. As you can see, you have to have the belt in front of this pin. If you have the belt back here, you're going to have problems. Now I'm going to keep the belt off the pulley. I'm going to release the lever over here, and now you can bring the belt back out to get it on the pulley. Now you want to get the belt in front of this idler pulley. Just like this. It's normal that the belt will be loose right now. It will only get tight when you push down the auger lever, as you see here. And now you want to line up this little pin or belt guard in the proper position. I'm going to leave it about here. I'm going to hold it, then tighten up the 1/2 inch bolt. Now I'm going to reattach the bracket for the chute. I've actually put a bit of anti-seize on it as well before it goes in. Now you want to line up the hole inside the rod to the hole on this outer casing and put this hair clip in. And then try it out to make sure it works good. And by the way, I'm going to lubricate the U-joint here with some white grease. And I'm also going to put some on the moving parts over here. You want to use the grease liberally. You're not going to go broke using grease. And you may make your stuff last longer. Now I'll turn it around just to get the grease everywhere. When you're ready to install this cover, you want to line up the holes here on the sides, inside the bolt here on each side. And you want to make sure the washers are on the outside of the plastic cover, and just slide it down. And now make sure both sides are okay. And now with the 3/8 socket, just tighten up both bolts. Now if you've disconnected the spark plug, just reconnect the boot. And this cover goes back on like this. I put a bit of anti-seize on the bolt there because they do tend to seize on there. And that's it, the job's complete. That's all there is to fixing up this gear case. As I mentioned previously, don't forget the 2 washers that I did not tape by accident. So I'm pretty happy with the repair. It's too bad there's not more snow here to really try it out good, but at least this way I could see that it does work and blow snow. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully this video will help you to save money fixing your own snowblower. So make sure to subscribe and you can see me in my next video. Have a nice day.